He bought me on a Tuesday, the way another man might buy a horse he intended to break by Friday. I know it was a Tuesday because the market woman who sold me kept saying it, over and over, as if the day of the week were the important part. Tuesday. Good luck, girl. Tuesdays are lucky. She said it while she counted his coin, and she did not look at me once, and I understood then that I had already stopped being a person to everyone in that square except myself. Let me tell you about that square, because I have carried it with me since. The way you carry a scar you didn't ask for. It was the kind of market that pretends to sell fruit and cloth and copper pots and does, in a corner, past the fish and the shouting, sell people. They keep the corner tidy. That is the thing that stays with me. The tidiness of it. The way the platform was swept and the chains were oiled so they would not rust and offend the buyers. The way the whole apparatus of the thing had been made comfortable for everyone standing on the right side of it. There were maybe a dozen of us that morning. A boy who would not stop shaking. 2 sisters who held hands until they were sold to different men, and then held nothing. An old woman who had made her peace with it so completely that she frightened me more than the buyers did, because I did not want to become her, and I could feel the years in that place that would turn me into her if I let them. I did not shake. I want that understood from the beginning. I stood on the swept platform in the morning cold with my wrists already raw from the practice chains they put on you the night before a sale, and I looked out over the heads of the crowd, and I found one point on the far wall, a crack in the plaster, shaped a little like a running dog. And I fixed my eyes on it, and I did not let them move. That was my whole strategy for surviving the morning. A crack in a wall, shaped like a dog. You would be amazed what you can hold together with less. I heard him before I saw him, not his voice. He had not said a word yet. I heard the crowd change. There is a sound a frightened crowd makes when a certain kind of man arrives. A hush that moves through it like wind through wheat. Everyone leaning back and going quiet at once. And I broke my rule and moved my eyes from the crack in the wall to see what could do that to 200 people. And that was how I first saw the king. The king did not count the coin. Kings do not count. He stood at the edge of the platform with his arms crossed and his face carved out of something colder than stone, and he looked at me the way you look at a problem you have already decided is beneath you. Fur across his shoulders, dark as a drowned thing. Armor that drank the light instead of throwing it back. And his eyes. I want to tell you I noticed nothing about his eyes, that I was too frightened, too proud, too anything to notice. That would be a lie. His eyes were the color of amber held up to fire, and they found mine across the whole width of that filthy square, and they did not let go. I looked back. That was my first mistake, or my first act of war, depending on which of us you ask. Because here is the thing nobody tells you about a man like that. The crowd around him was performing terror for his benefit, bowing and shrinking and getting out of his way, and I could see that he was so used to it, he no longer saw it at all. It had become weather to him. Fear was just the climate he moved through, and when I did not do it, when I met those amber eyes instead of dropping mine, when I looked at him the exact way he was looking at me, like he was a problem I had decided was beneath me. Something happened in his face that I did not understand until much later. He was surprised. This man, who I would learn had not been genuinely surprised by another living creature in longer than he could remember, stood in a slave market and was surprised by a woman in chains, and he did not entirely like it, and he could not entirely look away, and neither, God help me, could I. The market woman felt the coin change hands and finally looked at me, and there was something almost like pity in her ruined face. Tuesday, she said again, softer this time, as if she were apologizing. Lucky, she said, and I did not know if she was reassuring me or warning me, and I have spent a long time since deciding it was both. They did not put me in a cart. I had expected a cart. That is how it is usually done. You are stacked with the other purchases like sacks of grain and hauled off, and there is a mercy in it, the anonymity of the cart, the way it lets you be cargo and stop being a person for the length of the journey. But the king did not use a cart. He mounted a horse the color of storm cloud, and he had them walk me behind it, on foot, on a lead, through the whole length of the market, and out the far gate and onto the road. And I understood that this was the first of the cruelties, to be walked, to be seen walking, to be made to feel every step the distance between the platform and whatever waited at the end. Except it did not work the way cruelties are supposed to, because he set the pace slow. I noticed it a mile out, when my legs should have been failing and were not. He was holding that storm cloud horse to a walk a tired woman could keep, and he never once looked back to check. But the pace never once broke me either. And after a while, I stopped being able to tell myself it was an accident. A cruel man walks you fast to watch you stumble. This man walked me slow, and did not look back, and let me keep my feet through a whole afternoon on the road, and pretended, to himself maybe, more than to me, that it meant nothing. Either he is the strangest cruel man I have ever crossed, or he is no cruel man at all and is going to great trouble to appear as one, and I cannot say which of the two would be worse for me. A cruel man I understand. A kind man wearing cruelty like a borrowed cloak is a riddle, and I am far too weary for riddles, and I have the grim feeling I am about to become one myself. The road climbed. The country got colder and grayer and higher, and somewhere in the long afternoon the fortress came into view, sitting on its crag like something that had grown there. And I made myself look at it steadily. All of it. The walls and the towers, and the single high window that I did not yet know would be mine. Look at the whole of a thing, and it gets smaller. Refuse to look, and it fills the whole sky. I had learned that a long time ago, in the house I don't talk about. So I looked at the fortress, until it was only a fortress and not a fate, and then I walked the last mile to it on my own 2 feet, at a pace a king had quietly set so that I would arrive still standing, and I hated that the kindness of it had already, before I had even reached the gates, begun its slow work on me. They chained my wrists and walked me through the gates of his fortress, and I counted the doors because counting was the only thing left that belonged to me. 9 doors, 9 thresholds, each one heavier than the last, until we reached a hall so vast that the torchlight gave up before it reached the ceiling. I need to explain the counting, because it matters, because it comes back. When you have lost everything else, your name, your freedom, the right to be looked at like a person, you learn to build small kingdoms out of whatever is left. Some people pray. Some people go somewhere behind their own eyes and do not come back for years. I counted. I counted doors and windows, and the stones in a wall, and the breaths between one cruelty and the next, and inside that counting, there was a small clean room that belonged to no one but me, and no king, and no chain and no market woman could get into it. And as long as I could count, I was still in that one small room, free. 9 doors. I held the 9 like a stone in my fist. I told myself, whatever is on the other side of the 9th door, you counted your way to it, and that means you brought something of your own into this place, and they cannot take the 9 from you. Men lined the walls, his men, wolves wearing the shape of soldiers, and I could feel it on them the way you feel a storm before it arrives. That low animal hum under the skin, that promise of teeth. I had heard the stories, the way everyone had heard the stories, of the pack kings in the north and the thing that lived under their skins. But hearing a story and standing in a hall full of the truth of it are different animals entirely. The air itself was different in that room, charged, waiting. Every man in it could have become something with claws in the space of a breath, and they all held themselves so still, so deliberately human, that the stillness was its own kind of roar. The king climbed the 3 steps to his seat, and sat and regarded me, and one of his generals, a broad man with a beard like a hedge and a laugh like a landslide, leaned toward him and said something that made the whole hall go still. He said, 3 days. My king, he said, I have watched 100 proud ones come through these gates. I have watched every last one of them kneel. This one has a mouth on her. Look at her. Look at the way she stands. But pride is only fear that has not yet met the right teacher. 3 days. I will wager my northern horses that you have her weeping at your feet by the 3rd night. And the king smiled. It was the first time I saw him smile, and I hated that I would remember it, that it would live behind my ribs for the rest of whatever life I had left. He smiled the way a blade smiles when it clears the sheath. Done, he said. 3 days. I want you to understand what that wager was, because it took me a long time to understand it myself, and understanding it is the difference between the story the court tells and the story that is true. The court's story is simple. A cruel king took a bet that he would break a proud slave and won or lost, depending on who was drunk enough to tell it. But I sat in the middle of that hall and I watched the general's face when he proposed it, and there was something underneath the landslide laugh that I only recognized later when I had lived among these people long enough to read them. The general was afraid for his king. He had watched the king get colder every year, harder every year, more buried, and he had seen the king look at me across a market square with something in his face that the king had not shown in a decade, and it had frightened him, because a soft place is a place where a king can be killed. And so he did the only thing a rough, loyal, frightened man knows how to do with a soft place. He tried to turn it into a game, a wager. Something with rules, something with horses, something that could be won or lost and then be over. Break her in 3 days, and the softness is proven false, is proven to be only a hunt after all, and everyone can relax. That was the wager. It was not cruelty. It was a frightened man trying to save his king from the most dangerous thing in the world, which is caring about someone you cannot control. He just did not know yet that it was already far, far too late. A whole afternoon in his kingdom, and already I am the stakes in another man's game of dice. What a distinction. They will sing of it, surely. The ballad of the girl who was wagered against horses, and came in second to the horses. I kept my face still. I had learned to keep my face still in places worse than this, though I did not intend to tell him that. I stood in the center of his hall with my wrists chained and his whole court watching to see if I would crack, and I made a decision that was probably going to get me killed and did it anyway. I lifted my chin. I looked at the man who had just bet livestock on my ruin. And I said, into the silence, loud enough for the beards and the wolves and the drowned fur king to hear, 3 days is generous. You'll be disappointed sooner. The hall did not laugh. They did not dare, not before he told them whether it was funny. But the king's smile changed, just slightly, just at one corner, and something moved behind those amber eyes that I did not have a name for yet. Interest, maybe. The particular attention a predator gives the one animal in the herd that turns to face it instead of running. He rose. He came down the 3 steps, unhurried, and the whole court held its breath, and he crossed the hall to me and stopped close enough that I had to tilt my head back to keep his eyes. Up close, he was worse. Up close, the cold came off him like the chill off a river in winter, and underneath it, so faint I might have imagined it, something warmer that I refused to think about. Up close, I could also see that he was younger than the throne had made him look, and more tired, and that there was a thin white scar through one eyebrow that someone had given him a long time ago, and that he had clearly not forgiven. I catalogued these things the way I had catalogued the crack in the wall, the running dog crack, because a man is easier to survive when you have reduced him to a list of details, when you have made him small enough to fit inside the counting. A scar, a tiredness, younger than the fur. I told myself, he is just a man who has arranged for a great many other men to be afraid of him. I told myself, you have survived men before. I did not yet understand that this was the one lie the small clean room would not be able to hold. From inside the fur at his shoulder he drew out a chain. Silver, fine, the links so small they looked like something spun rather than forged. It caught the torchlight and threw it back in a thin, bright line, and I understood before he lifted it that this was for me, that this was the collar, that this was the moment I was supposed to feel myself become his. I had seen collars before, iron ones mostly, heavy and rusted and meant to hurt, meant to make a person understand in their neck and their spine exactly how much they now weighed on the scale of things, which was nothing. I braced for iron. I built the wall for iron. This was not iron. This was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen up close, and that was so much worse because I did not have a wall built for beauty. He did not clasp it roughly. That was the thing that undid me later, when I had time to think, which I did not yet. He lifted my hair aside with 2 fingers. Careful, almost gentle, the way you would move a thing you did not want to bruise. And he laid the silver against the back of my neck and closed it. And his knuckles brushed my skin, and I felt it travel down my whole spine like a struck bell. And I felt him go still. Not the stillness of a man concentrating on a clasp. Something deeper and stranger. His head bowed close to the curve of my neck, and I heard him breathe in, slow, deliberate, the way an animal reads the wind. And whatever he found in the scent of me stopped him the way a hand stops a struck bell. All at once, the sound cut off in the middle. For the length of one heartbeat, the careful hand at my nape trembled. For the length of one heartbeat, I felt something move under his skin, close to mine, vast and not human, and suddenly, terribly awake. His breath went ragged. And when I turned my head, just enough to catch the edge of his face, his amber eyes had gone bright as coals blown on, the pupils drawn to slivers, the eyes of the wolf and not the man, fixed on the place where the silver met my throat like he could not believe what his own nose had told him. Then he mastered it. Whatever it was, he forced it back down, and the man returned to the front of his face like a shutter drawn over a fire. But I had seen it. Down the line of soldiers, I heard a low murmur run and die. His men had scented it too, whatever passed between us in that heartbeat, and it had unsettled the whole armored wall of them. He is not permitted to be gentle. Cruelty I know the shape of. Cruelty I have outlasted 100 times over. But there is no defense drilled into me for a careful hand, and he has no right to use the one weapon I was never taught to parry. Now, he said, lo, only for me. You are mine. Say it. I said nothing. He waited. He had the patience of something that has never once in its life needed to hurry. And when I still said nothing, he stepped back, and he said to the hall, loud now, for the beards and the bet. She'll say it before the 3rd night. Take her to the tower. They took me to the tower. It was a long climb, and they did not help me, and I did not ask. And by the top my legs had gone to water, and my raw wrists had gone to fire, and the room they put me in was round and high, and had one window with no glass, just an arch open to the sky, and the wind came through it, and did not stop coming through it. And I understood immediately that the wind was going to be my companion and my enemy for however long this lasted. There was a pallet. There was a bucket. There was a view, if you dragged yourself to the window, of a country I had never seen and did not belong to. All gray hills going green, and then blue toward a horizon that promised nothing. I stood at the window a long time, not for the view, for the counting. I counted the hills. 7 that I could see clearly, and an 8th that might have been cloud. I held the 7 in a maybe, and it steadied me, and I turned away from the window, and I sat down on the pallet to wait for the ordinary cruelties to begin. The first day, he tried the ordinary things, the things I had braced for. Cold food or none. A room high enough that the wind never stopped talking. Guards who would not meet my eyes, which was its own kind of cruelty, being made into a thing that even the jailers found easier not to look at. I ate what came. I slept when I could. I touched the silver at my throat exactly once, in the dark, to see if I could work the clasp, and I could not. And I told myself the flush of something in my chest when my fingers found the warm metal was only cold, only the tower wind, only anything but what it was. Here's what I did not expect, that first long day of waiting. I did not expect to think about him. I had prepared myself to be afraid of him, to hate him, to endure him. I had not prepared myself for the way the memory of his knuckles against the back of my neck kept surfacing in the gray hours, uninvited, unwelcome, a warmth I had to keep drowning. The mind is a traitor. You spend your whole life teaching it to be a fortress, and then a man lifts your hair aside with 2 careful fingers, and the fortress opens a window it never told you about. I sat in the tower and drowned the warmth over and over, and it kept swimming back up, and I told myself it was nothing. It was the body's confusion. It was 3 days of practice chains and no sleep. It was anything at all, except the truth, which I was not ready to look at, and would not be ready to look at for 2 more days. He came at dusk. I heard the 9 doors, or their smaller cousins, opening one by one below me, and then the tower stair. And then he was in the doorway with the last of the daylight behind him, and his face unreadable, and a tray in his own hands, which was wrong, because kings do not carry trays. "Eat," he said. He set it down. Bread still warm. Meat. A cup of something dark and good. I looked at the food, and I looked at him, and I understood the shape of the game. Kindness as a lever. Give the starving thing a feast, and it learns to love the hand. I had seen it done. I had nearly fallen for it once, long ago, in a house I do not talk about. So I did the thing that surprised us both. I picked up the cup, and I poured it slowly onto the stone floor between us, watching his face the whole time, and I said, "I'm not hungry. That was the only wine I shall be given tonight, and it was good wine, and I have poured it onto his floor to prove a point to a man who did not so much as blink. A triumph. Let it be recorded among my finest victories, alongside going thirsty till dawn." The general would have struck me. Any sane man would have struck me. The king watched the dark wine spread across his own stone, and he did not move and he did not change, and then, and I swear this on whatever is left of my soul, the corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile. The memory of one. The ghost of the blade. "Waste," he said softly, "is a strange kind of pride." He crouched. He was suddenly at my level, close. Those amber eyes level with mine, and the cold of him wrapped around me and under it that warmer thing I kept refusing to name. "Most of them beg by now," he said. "The proud ones especially. Pride goes first. Did you know that? It's the loudest, so it breaks the loudest." He tilted his head. "But you poured out your own water rather than take it from my hand. That isn't pride. Pride would have drunk it and hated me. This is something else." "What?" I said, because I could not help it, because his voice did something to the base of my spine that I resented with my entire being. "What is it, then?" He stood. He looked down at me, and the last light left the window, and the torch took over, and turned his eyes to molten metal, and he said, "I don't know yet, and I find that I want to." Then he left, and the 9 doors closed one by one, and I sat in the dark with my wine on the floor, and my silver at my throat, and the horrible dawning understanding that this was not going to go the way either of us had planned. I did not sleep that first night. I sat against the cold curve of the tower wall, where I could feel the wind but not be in it, and I turned the day over and over the way you worry a loose tooth. I kept coming back to the wine on the floor. It had been such a small rebellion, pouring it out, and it had cost me. I was thirsty, and there would be no more until morning, and I had made my own night worse to make a point to a man who had not even flinched. And yet he had crouched down to my level. He had put his terrible amber eyes on the same plane as mine, and he had said, "This is something else." And no one, not once, in the whole ledger of my life, had looked at a thing I did and called it something else instead of calling it wrong. My cruelties had always been read as wildness, my refusals as stupidity, my pride, which was not pride, as pride. And a cold king in a fur cloak had crouched on his own wet stone and seen, in the space of one poured cup, that there was a difference between the thing I looked like and the thing I was. This is a trap. Obviously, this is a trap. He is very good at it, I'll give him that. Most men who want to hollow you out at least have the decency to be bad at it. But it is a trap, and the fact that no one has ever seen the difference before does not mean he sees it now. It means he has studied where the difference would be and aimed for it. He is a hunter. Hunters learn the shape of the thing they hunt. Do not mistake being understood for being safe. I held on to that. It was true, and it was armor, and I needed it. I just did not know yet that a thing can be a trap and be true at the same time, that he could be hunting me and seeing me in the same breath, and that the seeing would turn out to be the more dangerous of the two. The second day was worse because the second day he did not come at dusk. He came at dawn. I was not ready for dawn. Dusk I could armor for. I had all day to build the walls. But dawn caught me soft, half asleep, my hair wild from the tower wind, and my defenses still folded up in whatever room the mind keeps them. And when the doors opened one by one and the stair creaked, I barely had time to sit up before he filled the doorway again. No tray this time, just him. And he did not stay by the door. He crossed the room and he sat, on the floor, against the far wall, one knee up, an arm draped over it, a king sitting on stone like a soldier at a campfire. And he looked at me across the gray dawn light and said nothing at all. Why is he on the floor? Kings do not sit upon floors. There is an order to the world, thrones above and the rest of us below, and he keeps stepping over the line of it as though no one ever taught him where it was drawn. Someone ought to have taught him. It is really very inconsiderate that no one did. We sat like that for a long time. Long enough that the gray light went gold. Long enough that my heart, which had started somewhere up in my throat, climbed slowly back down to where it belonged. There is a particular intimacy in sharing silence with someone, and it is more dangerous than talking, because talking you can control, talking you can armor, but silence just sits there between two people, and slowly makes them real to each other. I did not want him to become real to me. I fought it. I counted the stones in the far wall, 41 whole ones and a broken 42nd, and it did not help, because he was in the room breathing quietly and being real, and no amount of counting could unmake a man who was determined to simply exist in your presence until you got used to him. And when I could not stand the silence anymore, I said, "Aren't you going to try to break me? Isn't that the wager? 3 days. You're wasting one of them sitting on my floor." He considered this. "Tell me your name," he said. "You bought me without one," I said. "You can rule without one too." I want to explain about the name, because he was right that it mattered, and because it is the thing I guarded most fiercely, and the thing I understand least about myself even now. They had taken my name at the market. Not literally. No one can take a name literally. But they had stopped using it. They had given me a market name, a selling name, a word for the thing on the platform, and every person who used the market name filed a little more of the real one away, until I was the only one left who remembered it. And it lived in me like a coal I cupped my hands around, so the wind would not get it. My name was the last of the small clean room. It was the deepest count, the one under all the other counts. If I gave it to him, and he was a trap, and he was a trap, then he would have the coal, and he could put it out whenever he chose, and I would be no one, truly no one, a person even to herself, only by the grace of a man who bet horses. So I did not give it to him, not on the second day. It cost me to refuse. Some part of me, some traitor part warmed by 2 careful fingers, wanted to hand it over just to hear him say it. But I held the coal. I held it. "I know what they called you at the market," he said. "I want to know what you call yourself." There's a difference. He looked at the silver at my throat, and something crossed his face that I could not read. "I've collared a great many people," he said. "It's a thing kings do. It's expected. The court would think me weak without it. Do you know that in all that time not one of them ever refused to say the words, 'You are mine. Say it.' Every one of them said it. Some wept saying it. Some spat it. But they said it." He looked back at me. "You haven't. You won't. I've stopped expecting you to." "Then you've lost your bet," I said. "Yes," he said. "I think I have." And he did not sound like a man who had lost anything. He sounded like a man who had found something and had not yet decided whether it would save him or ruin him. And I recognized the sound because it was the exact sound happening inside my own chest, and I hated it. And I wanted him to leave, and I wanted him never to leave. And both of those wants had the same shape, and I could not tell them apart in the gold morning light. He rose to go. At the door he stopped. He said, without turning, "The general thinks you're proud. My men think you're stubborn." He turned then, just his head, just enough for one amber eye to catch me. "I think you're the first thing in a very long time that has made me forget I'm supposed to be cold. And I don't know whether to thank you or send you as far from here as horses can carry you before I do something we'll both regret." Then he was gone, and I sat in the gold light with my hand pressed flat against my own sternum, as if I could hold the thing there still. And I failed. The rest of the second day was the worst kind of slow. A guard brought food at midday, and I ate it, all of it, because I had made my point with the wine, and a point does not need making twice. Starving in a tower to spite a man who had sat on your floor and told you he'd forgotten how to be warm is not defiance. It is only a slower way of letting him win. I ate, and I sat at the window, and I counted the hills, the 7 and the maybe. I did not sit alone for long. The 9 doors did not announce this visitor. He came without ceremony, and the first I knew of him was the beard filling my doorway, the general, the landslide, without his king. He looked at me a long moment the way a man looks at a horse he has bet against, weighing, appraising, searching for the crack that his coin depends upon. "Tomorrow night," he said at last. "That is all you have left, girl. One more day, and one more night." He said it almost kindly, which was worse. "I have seen the way he looks at you," he said. "I have served him since he was a boy, and I have never seen him look at anything the way he looks at you, and it is going to get him killed. Do you understand me? A king who wants something the whole world can see is a king with his throat bared. So you will break tomorrow night, or you will not. But if you have any mercy in you, girl, you will not make him show the court what you are to him. Kneel and be done. It is kinder to him than whatever you think you are protecting." I did not answer. I did not trust my voice to hold, and I did not have to, because the light in the doorway changed, and the general turned, and the king was on the stair. He should not have been there. He had made his cold retreat that morning, and there had been no reason on earth for him to climb my tower again before the wager was out, except that he had, and the look on his face when he saw the general standing over me was not a king's look at all. It was the wolf's. The amber had gone bright, and the pupils to slits, and there was a low warning note under his breathing. And for one terrible heartbeat, the two of them stood there, the old, loyal general and the young, cold king. And something passed between them that had nothing to do with words and everything to do with the animal fact of one wolf finding another too close to the thing it had not yet admitted was its own. "Enough," the king said very quietly. The general went. And the king looked at me across the room, furious at himself, the shutter already slamming back down over the fire, because he had just shown his oldest friend, in the space of a heartbeat, the precise thing the general had climbed my tower to warn me he must never show. He did not stay. He mastered his face and turned and followed the general down without a word. But he had come, against every reason, against the wager, against the cold he had spent a decade building. Some part of him had known the general was near me. had felt it like a hand at his own throat, and had climbed 9 doors and a tower stair to stand between us. I sat in the fading light and understood that the wager was already lost, and that only 2 people in the fortress did not yet know it. And one of them was the king, and the other, God help me, was me. The general's warning sat in me all afternoon and would not settle. Kneel and be done. It is kinder to him. And the terrible thing was that I understood it. I had spent my whole life learning to read exactly this, the shape of the crack a person's caring makes in their armor, and I could see the king's as plainly as the general could. What the general did not know, what I was only beginning to know myself, was that a person spends years building the machinery that keeps them safe, and every gear of it is built against cruelty, and not one gear of it is built against kindness. Kindness walks in the front door. Kindness sits down on your floor. There is nothing in the whole fortress of yourself made to stop it. Because who, in a life like mine, would ever have thought to build a wall against that? Night came, the second night, and the moon came with it. Fat and low and white, filling the glassless arch, laying a cold path of light across the stone to the foot of my pallet. And I lay in that light and did not sleep, and the tower wind kept up its endless honest complaining, and for the first time, it did not feel like an enemy. I did not understand yet what the moon does to a house full of wolves. I only knew that somewhere below me, in the dark of the fortress, something was awake and restless that had not been restless before, and that the pull of it reached all the way up to my tower, faint and low, like a note held too long on a string. Twice I heard it, not a howl, nothing so plain as a howl, but a sound half swallowed, the sound of a great throat catching itself before it could cry out. And each time I heard it, the silver at my throat seemed to warm against my skin, as though it were answering, as though the chain and the sound were 2 ends of the same taut thing. I told myself it was the wind. I was becoming very skilled that week at telling myself it was the wind. He'd said he found it restful, the wind that never pretends to be anything but relentless. And lying there in the dark, I found I understood him, which was more dangerous than wanting him, because you can want a stranger but you cannot understand one. Understanding is the thing that happens after the walls, and mine were going. I could feel them going, stone by stone by stone, and the terrible part, the part I could not forgive myself for, was that I was not fighting it as hard as I should have. Some traitor part of me had gotten tired. Some traitor part of me had spent a whole life holding the room shut against a cruel world, and it had finally, in a cold tower, met something it did not want to hold shut. And it was so tired. The wind was so honest, and the memory of 2 careful fingers was so warm. I fell asleep at last in the last dark hour with my hand around the silver chain, not to tear it off this time, only to hold it. I did not let myself think about what that meant. And in the morning everything broke, and it did not break the way the general had wagered. The 3rd day then. The day it all came apart, and came together, and came apart again, all before a single dawn was fully done. It began well enough, if well is the word, if there is a word for the strange suspended peace of a captivity that has stopped feeling like one. He came at midday. He brought no tray, and made no speeches, and he sat on my floor again as if the floor were his now, as if we had always done this, and we talked. God help me, we talked. About nothing. About the northern horses he'd nearly lost. About the way the tower wind never stopped, and how it had driven 3 of his predecessors half mad, and how he'd always found it restful. The wind, the way it never pretended to be anything but relentless. He told me things a king should not tell a prisoner. He told me he had been crowned too young, after a bad winter and a worse betrayal, and that he had learned the cold the way other men learn a trade, deliberately, as a survival, because a boy king who showed a soft place got the soft place found and pressed until it killed him. He told me he had made himself into the thing the throne needed, and had done it so well, and for so long that he had forgotten there had ever been a version of him underneath. He said all this looking at the wall, not at me, in the flat, tired voice of a man reading out an inventory of a house he no longer lived in. And I understood, listening, that he was not confessing to charm me. He was confessing because for 3 days I had refused to be afraid of him, and a person you cannot frighten is the only person you can tell the truth to, because the truth cannot be used as a weapon by someone who has already decided not to run. I had made myself by accident, by stubbornness, the one safe place in his entire terrible kingdom. And he had made himself, without either of us agreeing to it, the same for me. I told him about the house I don't talk about, a little, the edges of it, and he did not flinch and he did not pity me, which was the only correct response, and somehow he knew it. I told him more than I had told anyone in years. Not because he asked, he did not ask, but because he sat there being real and being unafraid and being, God help me, kind. And the coal in my hands wanted out, the way a coal always wants to become a fire if you let it near anything that will catch. I stopped short of the name. I stopped short of the worst of the house. But I gave him the edges, and he took them carefully, the way he had lifted my hair aside, like a thing he did not want to bruise. And when I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said simply, "They should not have done that to you." And something in my chest that had been clenched shut for a very long time came loose all at once, and I had to look hard at the crack in the wall of the moment, at 41 stones and a broken 42nd, to keep myself together. And at some point, I could not tell you when, that is the honest and dangerous truth of it, I could not tell you the moment it happened. At some point, we were not across the room from each other anymore. At some point, he had crossed to where I sat by the window, and I had not told him to stop. And he was close. Closer than the first night in the hall. Close enough that I could see that the amber of his eyes was not one color, but 100. Close enough that when he lifted his hand and touched the silver at my throat with one finger, I felt it in my teeth. Time did the thing it does in the moments that matter most, which is to stop pretending it moves at a steady pace. A whole life can happen in the space between one breath and the next, if the breath is the right one. His finger was at the silver at my throat, and I could feel my own pulse against it. Could feel him feeling my pulse against it. The traitor drum of it giving away everything the rest of me had spent 3 days refusing to say. Neither of us moved. The wind came through the arch. The gold light lay across the floor. And in that stretched, impossible, stopped moment, I understood that I had a choice. A real one. Maybe the first real choice I'd had since a Tuesday in a square. I could pull back, could rebuild, could reach for the counting and the coal and the small clean room and shut the door he had somehow found. It was still there. The room. The door was open, but I could still close it. He would let me. That was the thing that undid the last of me. I knew, with total certainty, that if I pulled back he would let me, would step away, would never once make me pay for it. The choice was mine. It had, impossibly, been made mine by the very man who had bought me. And I stood in the stopped gold moment with my whole life's machinery humming, ready, waiting for the order to defend, and I did not give it. And his control slipped. I saw it happen the way I had seen it at the collar. The man's face for one heartbeat became the wolf's. His amber eyes flared bright and went to slits, and his lips parted on the edge of something that was almost a snarl and almost a plea. And low in his chest there was a sound. A rumble I felt more than heard. The sound the whole fortress had made half swallowed in the moonlight the night before. Except now it was inches from my skin and it was not swallowed at all. His hand at my throat was not quite steady. Whatever lived under his skin had scented me again. Closer now. And it wanted. And I felt the wanting answer in my own blood. In the warm silver at my throat. In some deep animal place I did not know I owned. Until that moment it woke and strained toward him like iron toward a lodestone. I did not understand what was happening to me. I only understood that it was happening to both of us, that the pull ran in both directions, that whatever he was fighting to hold back was the same thing straining forward in me. There is a name for this, and I do not know it, and I am terrified that he does. This is not desire. I have felt desire and armored against it, and this is nothing so simple. This is my own blood turning traitor and reaching for a stranger as though it had been reaching my whole life, and only now found the direction. Whatever this is, it is older than the wager and older than the tower, and it did not ask my leave, and it is not going to give it back. You could take this off, he said, very quietly, mastering the wolf by main force, his voice rough with the effort of it. I could take it off. Say the word, and it's gone. You were never mine. I knew it in the hall the moment you told me I'd be disappointed. One does not own the thing that owns them. He is going to kiss me. He is going to kiss me. And I am going to let him. And then I am going to have to live with the fact that I let the man who bet horses on my ruin kiss me by a window. And the worst part, the genuinely humiliating part, is that I have never in my life wanted anything the way I want him to stop talking and do it. And that was the moment the door opened. Not the 9 doors, slow, one by one. This one flew. The general, the beard, the landslide laugh. Though he was not laughing now. The general stood in the doorway with 2 of the wolves behind him, and his face gone dark with something I would later understand was fear disguised as fury. And he said, "My king, the northern border, they've crossed. The treaty's broken. You're needed now." And then his eyes found the 2 of us by the window, the king's hand at my throat, the space between us gone to nothing, and his voice changed. "Ah," he said. So the wagers decided. He almost sounded relieved, as if a story he'd feared were true had turned out to be a joke after all. 3 days and you've got her. Good. Good, my king. For a moment I thought. He laughed, and it was the landslide again, and it buried me. For a moment I thought she'd got you instead. Come. There's a war. And the king stepped back from me. That is the part I have to tell you carefully, because it is the part that nearly ended me. He stepped back. His hand left my throat. His face closed like the 9 doors closing, one after another, cold sliding back down over all that amber, and he became the man from the platform again, the man who does not count coin, the man who looks at problems he has decided are beneath him. And he said, to the general, not to me, never once to me, "Yes, the wagers decided. See that she's fed." And he walked out. I have gone over that moment more times than I can count, and I have counted a great many things. I understand it now. I understand what it cost him, what he was protecting, what the general's face would have done with the truth if he'd let it show. I understand that a king who has spent a decade teaching an entire kingdom that he has no soft places cannot, in front of his most powerful general, on the morning a war breaks, reveal that a woman in chains has become the softest place he owns. I understand that his cold in that moment was not the absence of feeling, but the armor over the whole of it, thrown on fast and badly because there was no time to do it well. I understand all of that now. I understood none of it then. Then there was only the fact of it. His hand had been at my throat and now it was gone. His warmth had been the whole world, and now there was cold air where it had been, and he had looked at the general and said the wagers decided in a voice with nothing in it, a voice you would use about a horse, a voice you would use about a debt, and he had not looked at me. He had not looked at me. 3 days of amber eyes finding mine across every distance, and in the one moment it mattered, he had looked at everything in that room except the woman he had just handed back to the cold. So that's what I am. Line item. Settled account. I let him lift my hair, and I told him about the house, and and the whole time I was a horse he was going to win. And the only surprise is that the surprise still surprises me. You would think I'd have learned. You would think, Of all the lessons that market woman's world has beaten into me, this one would have stuck. Do not become real to someone who has already decided what you are worth. Everyone knows this. Everyone but me, apparently, standing at a window with the ghost of a hand on my throat, learning it again, slower this time, and for keeps. I want to tell you I did not break. I had held for 3 days. I had poured out wine and refused my name, and kept my face still through all of it. But there is a particular cruelty in being handed the thing you have spent 3 days refusing to want, and then watching it decide, in one breath, that you were only ever a bet after all. I sat by that window with the silver at my throat suddenly heavy as an anvil, and I understood that I had lost the only war I had ever nearly won. Not because I begged, because I hadn't, and it turned out not to matter, because I had never been the point. The horses were the point. The general's face was the point. I was a thing that happened between men. Well, there it is then, a heart undone in 3 days, which must be some manner of record. My thanks to the tower wind, to the northern horses, and above all to myself, for failing to recognize a snare merely because it had a handsome face and a low voice. A woman of my history. I ought to have known better than any living soul. That is the joke of it. I did not cry. I want that on the record. Whatever the general won, he did not win that. Night came. The 9 doors stayed shut. Somewhere below, a fortress emptied itself into a war. I heard the horses, the shouting, the great gates, and then a silence so complete it was almost a sound of its own. I sat in it. I did not eat the food they left. I worked at the clasp of the silver chain in the dark, again and again, until my fingertips were raw. Because if he would not take it off, then I would tear it off. I would leave it on his cold stone floor, the way I had left the wine. I would give him back the one thing he had put on me, and I would walk out of this tower a woman who owned nothing, not even a name, but who at least did not wear another person's claim on her skin. The clasp would not give. Of course it wouldn't. Fine silver, spun not forged, made by someone who did not want it coming off, and the cruelest part, the part I could not forgive, was that the chain had gone warm. It had been at my throat for 3 days, and it had taken my heat and kept it. And so, when I clawed at it in the dark, it did not feel like cold metal, like a thing done to me. It felt like something that had become part of me, like tearing at my own skin, and my traitor body did not want to let it go, even while my mind screamed that it was a brand, a debt, a settled account made of silver, that I should want it gone more than I had ever wanted. Anything. That was the moment I came closest to breaking. Not in the hall, not under the wager, not through any cruelty the general could have devised. It was there, alone, in the dark, at war with a warm chain I could neither remove nor bear to keep, that I felt the small, clean room begin to fill with water. I had held it my whole life. 9 doors, 7 hills and a maybe, 41 stones and a broken 42nd, a coal cupped against the wind, and it was all about to go under. Not because they had finally found the soft place and pressed it, but because I had shown it to someone freely, the way you would only ever show it to someone safe, and he had turned out not to be safe after all. And there is no counting that gets you back from that. The clasp would not give. I pressed my forehead to the cold window and I let myself, for one moment, exactly one, feel the entire size of it. The tower, the wind, the war, the empty space by the window where a hand had been. And then I put it away. Because that is what you do. That is the only thing you have ever been able to do. You put it away, and you survive the night. I did not cry. I have told you that already, and I am telling you again, because it is the one thing from that night I am still, after everything, proud of. Whatever the general won, he did not win my tears, and neither did the war, and neither, in the end, did the empty space by the window. I survived the night the way I had survived every night, by refusing to give the dark the one thing it wanted. And in the last gray hour before dawn, empty and raw and done, I made a decision. When they opened the doors, whatever came through them, I would meet it standing. I would meet it counting. I would meet it as myself. I did not know yet that what would come through the doors was him. He came back at dawn. I heard the horses first. One horse, hard ridden, and then the gates, and then a silence, and then the doors, the 9 doors, or their tower cousins, but wrong, all wrong, not slow and deliberate, but fast, faster, a man taking stairs 3 at a time, and I was on my feet before I told myself to stand, and the door opened, and he was there. He was ruined. That is the only word. The armor was gone, or half gone, and there was blood on him, not all of it his, and there was a wound at his shoulder crudely bound, and his hair was wild and his eyes. The cold was gone from his eyes. Whatever he had put back over the amber when he walked out of this room, the war had torn it off him again, and what was underneath was raw and open and afraid, and it was looking at me. I have tried many times to describe what it is to watch a person's armor come off, because it is the rarest thing I have ever seen, and I saw it only once, and it changed the shape of my life. Everyone is armored. Everyone you have ever met is wearing something over the true face, and most of us wear it so long and so well that we forget we have it on, that there was ever a face underneath. I had watched this man be more armored than anyone I had ever known. A cold so total it had become weather. A self so buried under the throne's requirements that he had told me, sitting on my floor, that he'd forgotten it was there. And now, in the doorway, in the gray dawn, with a war behind him and blood not all his own drying on his hands, the armor was simply gone. Torn off, and the face underneath was young and frightened and undefended, and looking at me the way a man looks at the one thing he rode through a war to reach, and I understood, all at once, the way you understand something your body knew before your mind agreed to it, that I had been wrong about the empty space by the window. He had not looked at everything except me, because I was nothing to him. He had looked at everything except me because I was the one thing in that room he could not look at, and still walk out the door. He crossed the room. He did not stop at a careful distance. He came to me and he took my face in both his ruined hands, blood and cold and the shake of a man who has ridden all night, and he said my name, not the market name, my name, the one I had told no one, the one I did not think I had said aloud. And I will never know if he read it off me somehow, the way wolves read things, or if he simply named me the way you name a thing you have decided to keep, but he said it, and hearing it in his mouth undid 3 days of walls in a single breath. I couldn't do it, he said. His voice was wrecked. I rode out and I sat that horse in the dark with a war in front of me, and all I could think, do you understand, was that I had walked out of this room and let that fat fool believe I'd won a wager. And the whole way to the border I heard myself say it, see that she's fed, and I wanted to turn the horse around and ride back and burn the wager and the horses and the border, and every man who ever taught me that cold was the same thing as strong. I let them think it was strategy, he said, when I broke off from the vanguard and turned my horse. I let my captains believe the king had some plan, some flanking thing, some reason. I had no reason. I had a war in front of me and a whole border depending on me, and I turned the horse around because I could not stand one more hour in a world where the last thing I had said to you was, see that she's fed. Do you understand what that is? For a man like me, I have sent people to die. I have made decisions that emptied villages, and I did not turn the horse around for any of them, because I had made myself into something that does not turn the horse around. That is the entire purpose of what I made myself into. And a woman I have known for 3 days, who poured out my wine and would not tell me her name, and told me I would be disappointed, undid the whole of it with an empty space by a window. I turned the horse around. My captains will spend years telling the story of the king's brilliant maneuver at the northern border. There was no maneuver. There was you. You have to understand what you are, he said, and his voice dropped, and the wolf was in it now, close under the words. I knew it in the market. I did not go there for you. I went there for grain contracts and border tallies. And then the wind turned and I caught your scent across 200 people, and the whole world narrowed to one point, and the thing under my skin that I have kept chained since I was a boy stood up and said mine before I had drawn my next breath. Do you know what that is, among my kind? Do you know how rarely it comes, and what it does to a wolf when it does? He pressed his brow harder against mine. Mate, he said. The word raw, like it cost him blood to say it. You are my mate. Fated, bonded, whatever the old words are. I stopped believing in them years ago, and then I smelled you, and every one of them came true at once. That is why I collared you, not to own you. I told myself it was to own you. I am very practiced at lying to myself. But the truth is, I could not bear to let you walk out of that square belonging to anyone but me. And a collar was the only claim I knew how to make in front of my court without confessing the whole of it. That is why the nights were the worst, he said. You felt it. I know you felt it. I heard your heart change through 9 doors. Under the moon, the bond does not whisper. It screams. And I lay awake 2 nights in my own fortress, with the pull of you dragging at me like a hook behind the ribs. And I did not come to you, because if I had come to you under the moon, I would not have been able to stop, and you had not chosen me. And I would rather have died of it than take from you the one thing this whole rotten market of a world had left you, which is the right to choose. He drew back just enough to find my eyes. And that is why I could not complete the wager, he said. A wolf cannot break its mate. It is not a matter of will. I stood by that window 3 days ago, meaning to prove the general wrong and prove myself cold. And I put my hand on your throat, and the bond lit up like the moon itself. And I understood that I had wagered on breaking the one soul in all the world I was built to keep whole. The general did not bet me your ruin. He bet me against my own nature, and he never had the smallest chance of winning, and neither did I. I bet I could break you in 3 days, he said. And I stood in that room by that window, and I understood that you had broken me on the first one, in my own hall, when you told me I'd be disappointed. Everyone who has ever come through those gates has looked at me the way the whole world looks at me, like weather, like a danger to be survived. And you looked at me like I was a problem beneath you. And no one has done that since I was a boy. And I did not know until that moment how badly I had been starving for it. To be looked at like a man instead of a climate. To be a problem to someone instead of a doom. I have never been so glad to lose anything in my life. I would lose it again. I would lose it every day. I would build a whole reign out of losing to you and count it the most successful reign in the history of this cold country. He rode back through a war. There is blood on him that is technically evidence of a war he abandoned. He said my name. My actual name. I have exactly one functioning thought left, and it is a scream, and I am not going to say it out loud. I am going to say something composed and dignified instead. I am a woman of enormous restraint. You're bleeding on me, I said. Yes, he said. You abandoned a war, I said. I delegated a war, he said. There's a difference. And I saw the ghost of the blade come back to his mouth, the almost smile, the one that had lived behind my ribs for 3 days, except now it was not cold at all. Now it was the warmest thing in the whole gray dawn. I reached up. My fingers found the silver at my throat, the chain I had spent all night trying to tear off, and I understood something as I touched it, that I did not, in that moment, want it gone. That the collar he'd closed to own me had become, somewhere in 3 impossible days, the only thing in the world that was mine. He'd meant it as a claim. I had turned it into a keeping. Waste is a strange kind of pride, he'd said. So is this. So is refusing to give back the one thing that had come to mean I was his because he was, entirely and finally and against every rule he'd ever lived by, mine. Think about what that chain had been, at the start. He had drawn it out of his fur in front of his whole court, and closed it around my throat and said, "You are mine, say it." And it had been the single most humiliating object in my life, a thing meant to make me into property in front of 200 watching men. And now, hours and days later, in the gray dawn with his blood on my face and his forehead against mine, that same chain had become the opposite of what he'd made it. He had put it on me to own me. But he had not been able to own me. No one could. I had made sure of that. I had spent my whole life making sure of that. And so the chain had had nowhere to land as a claim, and it had done the only other thing a chain can do when it cannot own you. It had bound us. Both ways. A chain, it turns out, has two ends, and if you cannot make it a leash, it becomes a tether, and a tether pulls in both directions. He had chained me to him, and in doing it, without either of us understanding, he had chained himself to me. "Take it off," he said, watching my hand. "You were never mine. Say the word, and it's gone." "No," I said. The amber went still. "No?" I closed my fingers around the chain, warm from my own skin, and I looked up at this ruined, bleeding king who had ridden back through a war to say my name, and I gave him the words at last, the words he had wagered on and stopped expecting, except I turned them inside out. I made them mine. I made them a claim instead of a surrender. "Keep it," I said. "It's the only thing I've got that says you're mine." He made a sound I had not heard a king make. And then his ruined hands were in my hair, and mine were fisted in what was left of his armor, and there was no careful distance left anywhere in the world, and he kissed me the way the tower wind blew, relentless, unpretending, never once trying to be anything but exactly what it was. And I stopped counting doors, and I stopped keeping walls, and I let myself, for the first time since a Tuesday in a filthy square, be a person again in the arms of the one man foolish enough to bet against me, and wise enough to be glad he'd lost. And then I felt him flinch and pull back a breath, and I remembered. "You're still bleeding," I said. "Sit down." "I'm fine," he said, in the voice of every man who has ever said I'm fine while ruining a perfectly good floor with his own blood. "Sit down," I said again, and I said it the way I had said 3 days is generous, and something in him that had spent a decade being obeyed by armies discovered that it very much liked being ordered around by me, and he sat. The wound at his shoulder was worse than the crude binding made it look. They always are. I did not have much to work with. The water they'd left me, a torn length of my own underskirt, the steadiness of my own hands, which had gone steady the way they always do, when there is finally a thing to do instead of a thing to endure. He watched me the whole time. That was its own kind of unbearable, being watched by those amber eyes from a hand's breadth away while I cleaned the blood from his shoulder. The intimacy of it worse than the kiss had been, because a kiss is a moment, and this was slow. This was minutes. This was the careful tending of a body by hands that had every reason to want it dead and did not. And we both knew what it meant, the way you know what a thing means long before you have words for it. "Hold still," I said. "I am holding still," he said, which was a lie. He was trembling again, that same fine tremor, the held thing still moving. "I am binding a war wound with a strip torn from my own skirt. My hands are as steady as any surgeon's, and my heart has caught like a thatched roof in high summer." He watches me as though I were the only healer in the world, and as though he would gladly abandon a second war to go on being watched over. I have never in all my life been so calm and so thoroughly ruined in the same breath. Whatever cruel God fashioned the heart to do both at once has a great deal to answer for. "There," I said, tying off the last of it. "Better. You'll live to abandon more wars." He caught my hand as it left his shoulder. He turned it over, my raw-fingered hand, the fingertips I'd worn down against a clasp that would not give. And he looked at them, and understanding moved across his ruined face. He knew, without being told, what I had spent the night doing, how close I had come to tearing his chain off and leaving it on the stone. And he lifted my raw fingertips to his mouth and kissed them, one after another, careful as he'd been with my hair 3 days before, and said, against my skin, "I'm sorry for the window. For see that she's fed. For every hour of this, you spent believing you were a wager." And I felt the last stone of the last wall come out, and I did not put it back, and I let him pull me down against his good shoulder. And there, blood and wind and all, I finally let myself be held. The general lost his northern horses. He paid up without complaint. He even, in his landslide way, seemed pleased about it, though he grumbled for the look of the thing. He'd wagered that the king would break me by the 3rd night. He never said a word about the fact that it went the other way, that the proud one with the mouth on her had walked into a hall in chains and walked out 3 days later with a king on his knees and a silver chain she refused to give back. But I caught him looking at me sometimes, in the months that followed, across the great hall, the beard, the landslide, the man who had bet horses on my ruin. And there was something in his face that took me a long time to name, and turned out, when I finally named it, to be respect. He had spent his life watching proud things come through those gates and break. He had told the king so, that first day, with total confidence. Pride is just fear that has not met the right teacher. And he had watched, for once, the teacher lose. I think it rearranged something in him. I think, in his rough landslide way, he was glad to have been wrong. There is a kind of man who has made peace with a cruel world by believing everyone breaks, and the only mercy you can do such a man is to prove, in front of him, that someone doesn't. The war, in case you are wondering, was won. Not by the king's brilliant maneuver at the northern border, whatever the captains say. It was won because the border held long enough without him for his second to bring the reserves up, and because the treaty breakers had overreached, and because 100 ordinary soldiers did ordinary brave things in the gray while their king rode the wrong direction for love. He has never once pretended otherwise to me. To the court, he lets the legend stand. A king needs legends the way a tower needs wind, relentless and load-bearing. But in the dark, with the chain warm between us, he tells me the truth, which is that he abandoned a war and got lucky and would do it again. And I tell him he is a catastrophe of a monarch, and he agrees, and we are both, in that admission, happier than either of us was ever taught to believe a person could be. I have my name back. He uses it. He is the only one who does, and he uses it the way you would handle a coal you had been trusted to keep alight. Carefully, gladly, like the honor it is. The small clean room is still mine. I did not give it away. I did not have to. It turns out there was a door in it I never knew about, and he came in through the door instead of breaking down the wall. And that is the whole difference. That is everything. That is the difference between being taken and being kept. He vowed to break me. I made him beg instead. People ask me, the few who know the real story, the ones allowed close enough to ask, whether I ever think about the market, whether I hate it or him for the beginning of it, whether it poisons the rest to know that it started on a swept platform with a woman counting his coin. And I understand the question. I do. But it comes from people who have always been free, who have the luxury of imagining that love should arrive clean, unpurchased, from a direction that does not shame anyone. My love did not arrive clean. It arrived in chains, on a lead behind a storm cloud horse, with a silver collar closed around my throat in front of 200 watching men. And I have decided, this is a choice. I made it deliberately, the way I make all the things that keep me whole. I have decided that this does not make it less. It makes it ours. It makes it a thing that grew in the worst possible ground and turned out to be the strongest thing either of us has ever stood on. Anyone can love in a garden. We built a garden out of a slave market and a wager and a war, out of poured wine and a coal cupped against the wind, out of the exact conditions designed to make love impossible. And I will not apologize for the ground it grew in, because I know what the harvest is worth precisely because I know what it cost. He still has the scar through his eyebrow, the one I catalogued in the hall to make him small. He has a new one now, at the shoulder, from the war he abandoned. And it healed crooked, because it was cleaned in a tower by a frightened woman with a strip of her own petticoat and no real skill. And he will not let the surgeons fix the look of it. He says it is the best thing his body owns. He says it is the only wound he ever got that came with a woman who ordered him to sit down. I tell him he is sentimental and ridiculous and a catastrophe of a monarch, and he agrees, and neither of us means it, and both of us are, against every rule we were ever taught, happy. And on the third night, when the fortress had gone quiet, and the war was someone else's problem, and the tower wind kept up its relentless honest complaining outside the window, I lay with my head on the chest of the coldest man in 9 kingdoms, and felt it rise and fall, warm, and I touched the silver at my throat, the chain I had tried all night to tear off, the chain I would now be buried in, the claim I had turned into a keeping, and I thought the last intrusive thought I would ever bother to keep secret from him, and then, because there were no walls left, not one, because he had come in through the door instead of breaking down the wall, I said it out loud instead, and I felt him laugh underneath me, low and warm and entirely undone. Tuesdays really are lucky. The market woman was right. I'll never tell her. She'd be insufferable.